What's up guys, Joey here. I just wanted to share a quick frame rate consistency fix for Halo Infinite multiplayer on PC. Now I'm running a 5600X and RX 6700 XT at a rather high ultra-wide 3440 by 1440 resolution, and obviously I have to use a few tweaks to get my frame rate up into the 100 plus range. But even after I do those tweaks, the minimum is still not that stable. The 1% lows especially are not that stable. So just as an example, you can just see here I'm running 100% resolution scale and my FPS target might be 100. Now, I've already gone through and tweaked my settings, but just to give everyone a baseline, if you're running different specs, this is the hardware specification chart to go off. So it's not just about capacity. If your capacity is 8 gig VRAM, it doesn't mean that your 5500 XT with 8 gig VRAM is good for high textures, because the way the game streams in does texture streaming, and the bandwidth it requires obviously needs a more powerful card with more bandwidth. So it's not just capacity, it's bandwidth. So for my system, for example, I fall for GPU and CPU, I fall in between high and ultra. And obviously I would lean towards high for most of the detail settings like the pop-in settings, texture quality, geometry. And then for CPU-based settings, because I'm trying to run competitive, I want as high FPS as possible, I just turn all the simulation stuff down. So just an example here, these are the CPU-based settings: blocking quality, simulation quality, which is for vehicle suspension and noise. If you're getting some kind of audio clipping, turn it to medium with vehicles, but I've been fine on low. Blocking quality is for animals. Terrain quality, I recommend high at most. And just ignore the flickering. This is just part of the game optimization. It doesn't allow full screen exclusive, and I've got a window in the background. If I minimize that browser window, it helps. But anyway, decal quality, you don't really notice this in combat, the bullet holes and stuff left behind. I just leave it on low. Effects, you lose effects altogether when you turn stuff to low. Like some effects just won't even get drawn. Same with reflections. If you want some eye candy, it doesn't hurt frame rate much to keep reflections on medium. And there are baked in reflections that do not get taken away. Like, see this surface here, this will become non-reflective on low or off, but then there are some maps with puddles on the ground that are just static, like they're pre-baked puddles, like this one here. If I turn reflections to off, it'll still be present. I'll still see it. So just as an example, I run medium reflections just because I do want to see a little bit of eye candy, but if I turn them off, this puddle is still here. It's a cube map reflection, as far as I can tell. Some kind of pre-baked reflection. So you still get that. Same with certain lighting effects. Like if you see some volumetric light from the sun at a certain angle, over here on this map, it's over here. I'll just show you. You can see some volumetric effect here. Turning your volumetrics off will not get rid of that. It's pre-baked into the map. So that's why you get some maps performing better than others. You'll notice some maps are more intensive. Now my CPU usage might be especially high. Once I turn these tweaks on, you'll see it go 50 to 70%. But also keep in mind, I have to adjust the resolution scale a bit lower when I show you this fix, because I'm running a local bot match. I'm not running an online bot match, which is handled by a server. So you can see my MS is at 0 MS. It's because my system is actually running the bots too. So let's just see here. Right. That was nice. But as you can see here, if I turn on my FPS counter at 1%, so it's 78, and you might have a target of 100 FPS or 144 FPS if you're running a lower resolution. It really depends on your monitor and a lot of variables, but this method will still be applicable to all setups. Like you can still simulate or extrapolate how to do it from watching me set mine up. So basically, I tweaked my settings. I was getting big FPS spikes, which are noticeable stutter, when I had my texture quality and geometry on ultra. And that is at native resolution anyway. I don't get it when I turn the resolution scale down. But just in doing that, it's because of the bandwidth requirement, how much data is being streamed. So just an example, I'm not going to actually change it, but if I set it to ultra, watch this VRAM usage jump. Goes to over a gig jump. And the effective resolution scale is a linear decrease of VRAM consumption and bandwidth for texture streaming. So it lowers the bandwidth requirement, and I believe that's the key to getting consistent frame rates and boosting your FPS. Is the game is built around consoles originally, and the game engine is upscaling from 1080p most of the time. And for the same reason, when we set our resolution to something around 1080p level, like this is ultra-wide 1080p at 75%, we get a massive performance boost, and the game starts running more like you'd expect it to run on a high-end PC. so around the 100 mark. But we can take it further. But the main thing to point out is that a lot of people they don't want to touch resolution scale. They don't want to lose image quality. If you're running at 70 FPS and you can gain like 50 FPS with minimal resolution, like minimal image quality reduction, it's because the game is designed this way. Like you can actually see that the buildings are mostly flat textured surfaces with a bit of detail thrown in, but the default sharpening level of 60 retains the clarity of a lot of the text. Like I can still read it perfectly fine at 75% resolution scale. And this is like a kind of, I don't know if this is intentional, but the way the game designed, when you lower the resolution scale, you don't even see the quality drop on character models because of the overshields. So just as an example, try to look at the detail of these overshields, especially at distance. You can just see you can just see that he's red. I can't make out the detail of his suit, right? And this is at 75%. You'd think that if I turn it up to 100, you'll see a lot more detail in their suits. So that's what you pay attention to when you're in combat. So we turn it back up to 100. And the way this game is designed, it's just, it does not benefit you that much to have 100% anyway. Like, I can't make out the detail because of all the effects going on, and the overshield just hides it. It hides those, any texture differences that there might be from turning that resolution scale down. But you can still see here the frame rate is not consistent, and the main guide going around, the main advice is, you've probably already seen these ads, but uninstall the high resolution texture pack if you don't need it. And obviously most of us, even on my 12 gig VRAM card, I don't want it because it does slightly hurt performance and it increases the VRAM bandwidth, the data requirement of texture streaming in and out of the game. So you can see here I've uninstalled this pack in Steam, Properties, DLC, just uncheck it. So that's the first bit of advice. And set your in-game settings realistically. So, you know, this is a rough guide. If you're running an 8 gig card, but it's not a high model, aim for medium. Medium is the sweet spot for visuals, like having your effects and stuff still present without completely turning them off. Like low will actually turn off a lot of reflections. Some surfaces become non-reflective. So it does add that eye candy with minimal performance hit, at least in my testing. I didn't get a significant performance difference. It's mainly to do with the texture streaming that causes stutter. So having Ultra is bad, for at least for my card. If you're on a GDDR6X card, you might be fine turning those texture settings right up, and the bandwidth is the 6X has more bandwidth, the GDDR6X, so you'd be fine for that. But on an AMD card with GDDR6, you might still get big stutters even running on Ultra, where the card, you feel like, okay, I've got tons of VRAM, I've got a powerful card, it should be able to handle this. I'm under the VRAM limit. As you can see, I'm under the VRAM limit on my card. I'm only using 8.3 gig, but having those settings turned up increases the bandwidth requirement, and yeah, GDDR6 has less bandwidth than 6X. So you just have to be aware of that. And then we're going to do the typical fix that's going around. A lot of people are suggesting two things, and I'll show you why they work and why they're not that great. First is minimum frame rate. People are suggesting that because what it does is, you know, for example, I'm trying to hit 100 FPS. I'll go up to 100 FPS if I do that. Okay? But the main issue with it is it's dynamic. So you'll get instances where you'll be in heavy combat and suddenly you'll actually get noticeable resolution scale degradation. Like the resolution scale will go all the way down to 53%, and you can't control what the algorithm's doing. So, you know, even these character models here, I don't know what it's running at. It could be running at 53% or under 60% already to maintain, you know, 100 FPS. But it's not the same as having a static resolution where, you know, like it's just more consistent. And as you can see, my 1% lows are still not that great. So, you know, it's basically dynamic resolution scale. It's not horrible. You can still run it if you don't want to run a fixed resolution scale. If you, like, it's not causing stutter at the very least, but the frame rate graph is not consistent either way. And the main method to get consistent frame rates is actually with the frame rate limiter, but there's a problem with the in-game frame rate limiter. So I'll just show you here. I'm going to leave this on 100. Who cares about that? Actually, no, I don't want it on 100. What I actually recommend is 70% as a baseline as a fixed resolution scale, because that'll give you consistent 100 FPS. For at least for my setup, give me over 100. I've got 133. But in saying that, my 1% lows are still not perfect. And if I turn it, actually, I'll go for 1080p ultra wide, like that's 75%. Now, watch this. So as you can see, I'm getting around 125 FPS, and I'll just be one of those people. I've got good FPS. I'm still getting minor stutters. There could be other latency in the background, but whatever's causing it on your system, like with this frame time graph that you can see in the below the frame rate, I don't actually get stutter, even if it looks like it. I don't feel any input latency stutter at these settings with that frame rate graph. It's not spiking high enough. I'm not getting, because my bandwidth is lowered, like I haven't got my quality on ultra, I've got the texture pack uninstalled. This is already smooth, but if you are getting stutter, one of the fixes people have been saying is set the maximum frame rate. Now watch what happens when I do that to this frame time graph. We get noticeable micro stutter. See that frame time graph, how it went from like a kind of a single line, now it's got like a little, that is all stutters in there. All tons of stutters. And if I set it lower, you can actually, it slows it down, but you can actually see what those stutters look like a little bit better. If I set it to like 60 maximum frame rate, you'll see those stutters a bit more clearly. See those stutters coming in? So I'm getting a consistent 60, almost. The 1% lows still suck because of the stutters, but this is just to demonstrate that the in-game FPS limiter is kind of crap. And what you want to do is not use the in-game limiter. Install Rivatuner, MSI Afterburner. It doesn't matter what model card. You could be running Gigabyte. I'm running a Gigabyte card. I don't use any of this tuning setting. I'm mainly using Rivatuner. And I go in here and I set a cap. So my FPS target might be 100, for example. I'll set it to 105. And I've got a hotkey. You can set a hotkey in MSI Afterburner in here in these settings. I'll just show you real quick. You can set a hotkey under, where is it? Toggle frame rate limiter, F10. So that's what I've set under the on-screen display tab. Minimize all that, go back into my game, make sure my limiter is off. And now this is at 75%. I am kind of simulating what I would realistically run in a multiplayer game, but because I'm in a local bot match just to have consistent testing, it's going to be a little bit off to what I've tested already. So I'm trying to hit 100 FPS minimums as an example. You could have any FPS target you want, but try to be realistic. If you're not getting 150 to 160 FPS average on your setup with the resolution scale turned down, you're probably not going to be able to get a consistent 144. Especially if you're hovering around 144, like you can't cap it to 144 and expect it to hold. You need to have a bit of headroom left over. And the idea behind this method is when you cap your FPS, instead of running your GPU pegged at 99% when you're walking through a corridor, as an example, you're leaving like 10 to 20% GPU utilization headroom to handle an intensive scene. So once you get an intensive firefight, suddenly your GPU is not at 99% trying to juggle the resources around. It's just got that extra 10 or 20% left in the tank to maintain stable frame rates. So an example here is I'm running uncapped still. I'm not enabling the cap. I'm just going to reset the FPS counter. And you can see straight away, I reset it at this spot in the game. Resetting it dropped me under 100 almost instantly. Like just walking around here drops me under 100. Okay, I'm at 70. So that's pretty crap in terms of consistency. But it doesn't lag for me like on my setup, but for someone else, this might be the difference between a stuttery feeling and no stutter. Especially if you've got background causes of micro stutter. So now watch what happens when I enable a cap to 105 through Rivatuner instead of using the in-game limiter. You see how the frame time consistency has improved by an insane amount. That's what's wrong with the in-game limiter, and why some people are saying, well, it's helping them, it's not helping, and other people are saying it's worse and things like that. It's because the limiter is not working properly, and if you're not looking at an OSD, you can't even know if it's working properly, so you might be getting some placebo effect. It definitely helps to an extent, like if you're running 130 and it's not consistent, depending on your system latencies, it could be helping, but it's not comparable to Rivatuner that does a much better job. And if I was in a multiplayer match, it's actually less intensive on my CPU because I'm not it's not handling all the bots. The bots are server side, but because I'm doing local testing, the results are not as good as they would normally be. So normally 70% will get me a consistent 100 plus, 70% like this, and it won't go below 100 on a multiplayer match. But in a bot match where I've got 8 bots on local, it still might drop a little bit, but not here anymore at 70%. So you can just see the difference. So this is Rivatuner FPS cap, 105 FPS solid. And I am on a 100 Hz monitor, so I'm not aiming for 144. But just to give context, you know. You can see how I'm in combat, and yeah, it's not really dropping at this location. So I have to find a spot in the map that gives me good, accurate testing. If I uncap it, and I just walk around here like I was doing, it's already going under 105. It'll go lower as soon as I start fighting. If I find an enemy. 99, 93, 87. So yeah, you can clearly see 20 FPS lower on the 1%, and that is where your consistency is. And the frame time graph, look at it. It's got all these little spikes built in. That's just the GPU trying to juggle or prioritize what's important, and it has to choose when it doesn't have enough headroom for whatever reason. And just because it's not at 99% doesn't mean that it's not pegged at some part. Like some, what would I say? Some section of the graphical pipeline, for lack of a more technical way to say it. Like, I want to keep it easy to understand as well. But some section of the graphical pipeline might be getting choked at this scene. That's causing it to have to prioritize, and I'm getting an FPS drop to 75 because of that. But if I leave headroom in the tank, instead of 94% usage, we are now at 105 with 81% usage. See the GPU utilization? That means that when, you know, that intensity, whatever, maybe the view distance, something in the distance is causing that would normally drop FPS because the GPU doesn't have the resources for it. Now it does have the resources, so I'm not falling under 105 anymore, even in combat. So yeah, I just want to demonstrate that because I've actually used this method across multiple titles, including Cyberpunk, with good success, and it's kind of not something that the review sites publicize much. That you can actually, like when you see two different graphics cards and one's got a bad 1% low in a game, they don't publicize, oh, well, you could use an FPS limiter and bring up that 1% low. It's not really an advertised thing because it would throw off all their testing. And if you're comparing raw graphics card performance, yes, the way they test is good, but on a budget, like for a normal use case where you might have a budget card, you might be on a mid-range card, and you're just trying to squeeze out more performance, and you look at a review site that tells you your 1% low is around 80 or normal, well, maybe you can tweak it up to 100 depending on which method of FPS cap you use. And then the other one minor other thing is when you do use a resolution scale, as you can see, it does not have a significant impact on image quality until I get under 60%. Most games will actually show significant degradation, like Cyberpunk at 70% looks horrible. All the textures just get blurred. But Halo with the default sharpening of 60 looks decent at 70%. And so that's where the baseline is, and you can, you know, tweak it up or down depending on what you're aiming for. But then the other trick is when you are using a lower than 100 resolution scale, crank this up to 100. And that'll bring a lot of that detail back. Especially in the buildings and stuff. But you can see here that it's not blurry. Like, I don't have blurred textures, and I can still read, you know, the UI is not affected. This looks fine. The way that they've designed everything is just, it goes well with resolution scaling. Alrighty guys, so this is the end of the tutorial. I'll just leave you with my settings. If this video helped you out, then please like and subscribe. I greatly appreciate any support I can get. And if not, at the very least, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.